There's a lot of fear mongering, but there is some real fear underneath it. And I think in the last 5, maybe 10 years, it's been about this the homegrown terrorist, not the guy who gets on a plane from Saudi Arabia and shows up here to do something bad, but someone who was raised here, perhaps born here. And and so I think when you talk about Herald Square, these 3 guys in Brooklyn, the other plots, this is what is being played into. But there have been some cases where we've sort of seen that, right? I mean, Boston Marathon is one. You had the guy who drove his SUV into Times Square. Mm-hmm. The Fort Hood shooting is one that I don't know a lot about. But, is the homegrown threat like a real threat? And how do we separate the real threat from some of these cases that haven't really reflected that?
I think there's always going to be some baseline level of terrorism in society. There always is like some threat of terrorism. And it's something we don't think about too much, but we're in a state of perpetual war all the time. Like for 14 years now, we've been at war. And the majority of people, when they do these attacks, the reason, at least some tangential reason, is they cite those wars. And it's just a natural byproduct of that. So we don't engage with it much because most people don't serve in the military. We don't see the effects of it. But, this is a natural result of that. And we'll never totally eliminate terrorism completely. And to do that, you have to completely live in a police state, which I don't think anyone would want to do. So I think that we should have a sane, healthy sort of, estimation of what the threat is, which on rational analysis is not that great. And even these homegrown guys, mostly buffoonish, a lot of times informant involved, trying to drum it up. And once in a while, there are legitimate things which, security services have tools to deal with. And we don't...
But look, even some of those are going to get through, right? I mean, that's the thing. Perfect security is an illusion, especially in free societies. Mm-hmm. Like, there are just some barriers that you can't cross. And, like, it's going to happen. There's always going to be crime. There's going to be terrorism. And you do what you can with these law enforcement tools to try and stop these things.
Right. And we have a healthy view of murders in America. We just sort of this is the level we live with it. It's not real good.
Well,
we try to do it.
Healthy. I mean, they're
but I mean,
there are things that we could do about it, but we don't.
Right,
but I mean, in general, it's not this hysteria.
Right, hysteria. So.
What is homegrown terror? What does that mean? What does it mean to be homegrown?
I would say terrorism which has not been directed by an organization based abroad, and the idea for it was, generated here. So people who, like the Boston Marathon guys, there's no indication that they were directed by any group like Al-Qaeda or anything else. It was something they cooked up in their living room or in their bedroom. So I think that's a fair definition of homegrown, even if it was inspired to some degree by events elsewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is part of the diffuse world of that includes the internet, right? Like, it's easy enough to go and read something on the internet that makes you say, we should blow up this bomb at the Boston Marathon, and then you go to another website and you find instructions for making a pressure cooker into a bomb filled with ball bearings and nails.
Right.
And then you go do it. And so I think that's pretty right. I mean, it's another word that gets used a lot is the lone wolf terrorist.
Right.
Like, it's kind of the same thing. And I think that really speaks to the what we were saying before, that it's just that it's going to be impossible to stop all of them. It's just not going to happen, because as long as you've got a free society, people are going to have access to this information. People are going to be inspired to do really messed up things, and people are going to have the means to acquire the knowledge to do them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of, getting back to where we started with the Brooklyn ISIS plot. I mean, that's part of what's so enraging about the way this plot was blown up in the headlines, is that these were 2 guys who really didn't have couldn't put the pieces together, right? Like, it still requires some effort, and it's something that they can do on their own, but they weren't able to put those pieces together and act in any way, and they straight up told the FBI that. Right. Like, if you really wanted to make an attempt on Obama's life, but these guys were just saying it with no idea how they were going to get there, or really even any evidence that they were that they were even really thinking seriously about it.
It's got to go down in that FBI agent's whole life history as the greatest and easiest interview he's ever had.
Funniest thing to me, he had to come back 3 days later just to confirm, did you really say that? Are you sure? Before you do that?
And what's maddening too is that those guys didn't kill anybody and probably could never have killed anybody, even if they made it to Syria. Right. Whereas you had this incident in North Carolina, really roughly around the same time, of the shooting in the housing complex, with some question about whether that was motivated by a parking dispute or by anti-Islamic sentiment.